We're going to talk about power today. And power is, in some ways, the opposite of what we've been talking about so far, in terms of obscuring factors. Power is the likelihood that a study will yield a statistically significant result when the independent variable really does have an effect. It's a consequence of sample size, effect size, and our p-value. So, as we've talked about so far this semester, with small samples, in this case, an N of 10, we're going to have really variable means just by chance. On the other hand, when our sample size is larger, then it's easier to see differences. Now, we're going to talk about this on several occasions over the next several weeks, but null results do happen, and they should be reported transparently. And I think a really good place to look at this is in terms of vaccines and autism. As there is very little data suggesting that vaccines cause autism. In fact, there is one study by Wakefield et al. With a sample size of 12, that's tiny, that reports this relationship. On the other hand, there are many studies, I've put some here, with large sample sizes that have been unable to find the difference that Wakefield et al. Proposed. What they, and they have done all sorts of things in order to address this. They've randomly assigned children to vaccine, no vaccine groups. They've done, they have looked cross-culturally. They've done whatever we can, or whatever they could. And remember that brick wall. That combination of all these studies helps us to draw some conclusions about whether this is in fact a difference. And really, it looks like not. In fact, Wakefield et al.'s research has been retracted. It was published in a well-known journal, The Lancet, but has also been retracted because, the evidence just did not support it. As we've talked about in terms of this suicidality and self-injury study, there are a variety of things that might be happening, in terms of attrition rates, in terms of intensity of our intervention, in terms of measurement of our dependent variable. However, sample size was sufficient here. Now, one of the things to keep in mind is that null effects are probably published less often than significant differences. In fact, there has been a systematic bias in the literature in favor of statistically significant differences. Everything else gets put in the file drawer or put in the circular file, our garbage can here. Null results can be just as interesting as results showing group differences, like, the differences with mastectomies. Because of these concerns, journals are becoming much more likely to publish null effect research. It helps us to recognize to what degree, what percentage of the research on antidepressants actually is published, demonstrating that, what percentage where we're not finding a difference. And another bias here is that null effects just aren't reported as often, and that can be a problem. So we're going to stop here with chapter 11, and the next video will be on chapter 12. And take care. Bye-bye.